Welcome to PENSARE Basketball. In today's episode, we're going to talk about loss aversion as a general concept, as also an Achilles heel for the Toronto Raptors front office, a front office that has been often heralded as stable, forward thinking, futuristic, responsible, fiscally responsible, but also at times has been incapable of making a decision to attach to their own assets. And if you're somebody who's wondering, was this more of a Bobby Webster thing or was this more of a Masai Ujiri thing? I think we're going to find out. This is often a front office that thinks that they know better than everybody in the league. They will often make Hail Mary swings at sometimes very controversial moves. Controversial moves like trading for Kawhi Leonard when he said he wanted to go to LA, betting it all for a championship, trading a young franchise cornerstone center for an aging one when they swapped Jonas Valanciunas for Marc Gasol. These things are sometimes controversial. These decisions can be controversial. There's always a bit of a downside risk, but also there have been decisions like not trading Fred VanVleet, not trading Pascal Siakam, not trading OG Anunoby when there was still value. If you want to look at loss aversion, and this is a concept that is a little bit foreign to you, and you're more or less wondering, like, Rob, what is loss aversion really? Here's the best way that I can explain loss aversion. And I say this as a guy who comes from the finance world, that loss aversion is a huge thing when it comes to stocks and investing, gambling as well, to the people who gamble. The best way to explain it is the following. I give you two situations. Situation number one, you 100% of the time lose $3,000. Situation number two, 80% of the time you lose $4,000. Which of those two situations do you choose? Now flip it. I give you a 100% chance to get $3,000 or I give you an 80% chance to win $4,000. Now, if you're like most people, you're going to flip this somehow. And I asked my girlfriend about this just right before she left for her Christmas party. And I said, which would you rather have? 100% chance at $3,000 or an 80% chance at $4,000? And she said, well, the 100% chance at $3,000, of course. And I said, but you realize that an 80% chance at $4,000 is actually $3,200. She's like, but what if I get zero? And this is ultimately the 100% loss aversion trap. And if you think of it that way, you can also think of it as how your algorithm, how gambling companies hijack your brain to keep you at the table. When you go to a roulette table, let me give you an example. You put $10 down, okay? It doesn't hit. The numbers that you covered don't hit. What do? You stay because you lost, but you have a difficult time locking in that loss, right? So you stay, you keep playing. Now, 1 hour has passed. You've had some wins, you've had some losses, but you do a quick calculation and you realize that you're down $55. And you start thinking, if the next one hits, I'll not be down $55. Tyler saying, why you frozen? Am I frozen? Do I need to restart this? Let me know. Please let me know. Somebody else. Am I frozen for Tyler or am I frozen for everybody? You let me know. I'm not frozen on my end. So can you guys let me know? No, I'm good. Tyler, you might want to refresh. Sorry, that's weird. That completely threw me off. All right. Tyler, I hope you're not trolling, man. I have completely lost my train of thought. Where the hell was I? Okay. You stay at the table because you're thinking, if I could just make it back, if I could just make back that 55, then I won't feel bad. But the more likely outcome, given that every single spin of that roulette wheel is more likely to result in a loss for you than a loss for the casino, is the more likely outcome is you're probably going to go further into the hole. Now, of course, there's a chance your next spin is a mega win and you get $2,000. There's always a chance for that. I think when people lose, they gamble bigger to make back what they've lost. And it just keeps happening and happening. But if you actually understood loss aversion perfectly, you would never gamble because you would know 100% of the time that the most likely outcome is for you to lose. There is an emotional pain associated with loss that is stemming from childhood all the way up to adulthood. And I don't think that just because people are paid millions of dollars to organize or run an organization like the Toronto Raptors, that they are immune to the absolutely very real human biases that we all suffer through. Loss aversion impacts everybody. For instance, you're not happy in your relationship. You stay in that relationship because it's your relationship. You don't think of the person that you're currently in a 3-year relationship with, and you've been unhappy for 2.5 years of that 3-year relationship. You don't think about that person like you think about the person you just meet, because the person you just met is not known to you. There's no association. So the pain of losing a relationship, it's the same thing as going to, for instance, going to your closet, realizing your closet is very cluttered. There is a coat in your closet. You have not worn it in 2 years. What do? Probably, if you're not someone who has a loss aversion bias, you're going to toss that coat out. You're going to donate it. If you are somebody with a loss aversion bias, you're going to think, well, what if I need it later and then I won't have it and then I'll be sad? Loss aversion keeps people stuck. The fear of losing is a very real thing. Now, think about how it applies to the stock market. You have three stocks, okay? Three stocks in your portfolio. One of them is performing terribly. One is pretty much performing at market average, and one is performing well above market average. And so the more likely investor, like the most likely investor, is not going to invest more in the stock that's up. Actually, they're going to sell the stock that's up and hold the stock that's down, because I bought Netflix at 108 and it's down to 100 right now. I don't want to sell it at a loss. And the most likely outcome here, based on history and based on data, is that the winner you sell is going to outperform the loser you hold. Not always, averages. So I establish all of this to say that the Toronto Raptors suffer from a severe loss aversion issue, and it has impacted every element of this organization for a long time. Now, there's also a lot of biases at play, which is to say, well, how can you ever criticize an organization that won a championship? Easily. Easily, you can criticize organizations that have won championships. The Denver Nuggets have won championships. They have been criticized for not putting enough depth around Jokic. The Lakers won a championship in the bubble. They have been criticized heavily before getting, the Dallas Mavericks to hoodwink themselves with Luka Doncic. The Milwaukee Bucks are currently under fire from the entire league for how they have failed to build a competitive core around Giannis Antetokounmpo. They won a championship. There's nobody who's above criticism. When you go the wrong way 3-4 years in a row, we have a right to criticize you. The Toronto Raptors' last home run hit of a move was drafting Scotty Barnes. And even that, I think, we as Raptor fans who watch Scotty Barnes every night would say that's a home run. But there are people in this league that could say, well, you could have drafted Alperen Sengun, traded down, gotten multiple picks, drafted Franz, et cetera, et cetera. So, for instance, I love Scotty. Scotty's my favorite player. So obviously I'm not quibbing about trading for Scotty or drafting Scotty. But what if you had, for instance, I don't know, made a deal with the Bucks, not the Bucks, the Warriors, who held picks 7 and 14 in that draft, picks that they used on Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody, and you drafted Franz Wagner and Alperen Sengun. Are you better off today with Franz plus Sengun than you would be with the Raptors drafting Scotty Barnes at fourth? I think you could probably make a case you would be. So even the perfect decision that you hold as that decision saves all decisions could be argued is not a perfect decision by any means, but a very good one, especially when it would be compared to what would follow. And that's sort of the point. So let me organize my thoughts completely, because I took notes for a live, and you can always tell when I'm doing a live late that it's going to be very compact and it's going to be very, very full of information. So let's start with the loss aversion as a core organizational habit of the Toronto Raptors. All right, the Toronto Raptors front office has steadily shown a fear of losing value. Okay, it leads them to delay decisions until the market collapses. And they don't seem to completely appreciate that everyone does not think what they think. If I have a very valuable Sharpie or, dry erase marker. And it's valuable to me because my dad gave it to me. And I wouldn't give this up for $100. My dad did not give this to me. I'm just saying, for instance, this is $100 thing to me. Or, I don't know. What else do I have? I have a piece of paper. Okay. This is a very valuable piece of paper. I don't know. Whatever. It doesn't mean that other people are going to give a shit that my dad gave me this dry erase marker. This dry erase marker might be worth hundreds of dollars to me, and I wouldn't give it up for anything because that's associated to my father who passed away. But it's worth pennies to you. You couldn't get 20 cents for this on eBay. That's kind of where we were with Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby. You have a value attached to them because they won a championship with you. You drafted them. You developed them. You know them. Moses Moody doesn't have that value to you because you don't know him. You didn't draft him. He's not in your organization. Even Jakob Poeltl, which is an interesting, fork in the road for the Raptors. I could make an argument that not trading for Jakob Poeltl probably puts you in a much better position today because you would have been having a chance to draft a Donovan Clingan or a Zach Edey, which frankly, given the fact that Jakob Poeltl is currently making $20 million for the next 2 years and then has an extension coming in after that, yeah, I think most reasonable people would trade Jakob Poeltl right now for even one half of what you traded for him 2 years ago. And I could make an argument that having Jakob Poeltl on your roster has made you a better team for the last 3 years that you probably should have been tanking. See my point? The one decision to trade for Jakob Poeltl, as good a player as he is, pretty much sets you back 5 years. And it's not even to talk about the potential loss of drafting Wembanyama, because that's clearly a gamble, right? It's gamble. You're gambling on the lottery. But tanking fully in that situation, tanking fully the year after, when you were damn clear that you were not moving forward with the core of Fred, Pascal, OG, etc., and you were going to rebuild around a player who had a lot of holes in his offensive game and needed place and time to work through them like he had last year. But the Raptors just couldn't quite get all the way down. They couldn't quite bottom out completely. They couldn't do what the Thunder did. They couldn't sit perfectly reasonable vets for an entire year. They couldn't take on dump salary. They couldn't do that. They always had to be somewhat competitive. They always had to keep afloat. Why? Right? Instead of acting proactively, the Toronto Raptors, when they often wait for situations to sort of resolve themselves. We don't want to trade Fred for a first-round pick and Grayson Allen. We don't want to trade Kyle Lowry for what was potentially at the time rumored to be Tyrese Maxey, although I don't think you'll ever get Daryl Morey on record to say that deal was ever going to happen. But even something like that could have happened, right? It results in losing leverage, and then the long-term pattern fits very perfectly with the classic loss aversion psychology, avoiding short-term pain at the cost of long-term gain. Short-term pain is having Khem Birch as your starting center. That's painful because he sucks. Short-term pain is not giving Fred, Pascal, OG a chance to prove themselves in the playoffs. But long-term gain is being patient with the 20-year-old that you have on your roster who just happened to jump everybody and win Rookie of the Year, and not making a trade for Thaddeus Young, which effectively costs you Christian Brown. So the question to you today, of course, there's no guarantee that the Raptors would have drafted Derek Lively and Christian Brown with the picks that they inevitably gave up, or even Cason Wallace. But you look at some of these players, if the Raptors truly believe in their ability to scout, develop, passing up on Christian Brown, Nikola Jovic, guys like that, Andrew Nemhard, for a chance at Thaddeus Young and Jakob Poeltl. Why? Because what you value today is so much greater than what you value in the future. So being patient on one end with we don't want to lose Scotty Barnes, right? We don't want to lose Scotty Barnes. We want to build around Scotty Barnes. But we also don't want to lose all of these things that are kind of in the way of building around Scotty Barnes. It's stupid. The Kyle Lowry non-trade. I mean, look, man, I understand to some extent that you don't want to trade a franchise legend. But can I please remind you that this franchise legend was almost traded 3 different times during the run-up to the NBA championship. He was traded almost at the deadline for Mike Conley because he was still sour and still upset. He was almost traded at the start of We the North. What is this kind of like romantic need to get Kyle to his spot? Kyle Lowry is a free agent. He's made a lot of money. You've been paid $30 million a year to not be one of the top 3-4 point guards in the league. I would argue the Raptors paid Kyle Lowry very well. They put up with a lot. They got a lot. I love Kyle Lowry. He's one of my favorite players of all time. There was no need at all, unless this was a Kobe Bryant, he's going to retire with us type of thing, to not trade him. Again, you can try to explain the situation to him and say, listen, man, you're not going to be part of our future right now. You want to go to Miami. We want to get you some asset. We want to get some assets in return for you. So here's the thing. We're going to trade you to a playoff team and you're going to go compete for a championship with somebody else. And we are going to get back a first round pick or multiple firsts or a couple of seconds, and we're going to get that back. It's the same thing with doing right by Dennis Schroeder. There's so many examples of this, right? Dumping Dennis Schroeder, who you had just signed, who was playing reasonably well for you, just to get him to his desired destination because he didn't want to back up Emmanuel quickly. Fuck you. You have a contract. Back up Emmanuel quickly. What's wrong with that? But you don't want to lose grace with Dennis Schroeder lest you compromise your integrity with the league. And so you dump Dennis Schroeder for salary, Spencer Dinwiddie. You waive Spencer Dinwiddie, so you eat salary. You basically pay Dennis Schroeder to not play for you. And then the Nets patiently build up Dennis Schroeder's value and trade him for 3 second-round picks to the Golden State Warriors. Why did we not get 3 second-round picks for Dennis Schroeder ourselves? We could have been patient. We could have let it. We could have slow played it. Certainly don't think Dennis Schroeder is hurting your team today. Why? Because you wanted to maintain integrity. Because when you signed him to the best contract he was going to get, by the way, by anybody, to a 2-year deal, you promised him a starting spot, and then when you traded for Emmanuel quickly, you couldn't keep up that promise. Shit, start them together for all I care. What does it matter? But he wasn't happy, so we had to accommodate him. What about letting Fred walk for nothing? Oh, he's a franchise legend. He is a sixth man. Okay, he's a sixth man that you gave every opportunity in the world, and letting him walk for nothing was the weirdest thing because he played this organization like a fiddle. He didn't like the contract offer they gave him. They went above and beyond the contract offer. He walked away scotch-free. He made an entire, mess of this organization in terms of chemistry, podcasts, maligning, and then eventually held the organization ransom as he negotiated a better deal with the Houston Rockets and then walked to a terrible organization and made them good. Now, my point here is Fred VanVleet bet on himself. Cool. Why did we help him? We helped him in so many ways. We got him the center that he wanted, allowed him to fix all of his numbers. And if you can see the impact that Jakob Poeltl has on Emmanuel quickly, you can certainly understand that he had a tremendous impact on Fred VanVleet. So why let him do that? It comes back to the loss aversion. Losing Fred VanVleet for what didn't seem like a great package, but is effectively better than losing for nothing. Holding the stance that you're not going to pay him, and then in the last minute, upping your offer so that he can have a better bargaining position with the Houston Rockets. Imagine today if Fred VanVleet was actually on the Raptors at $34 million a year. And then at this point, the only thing we'd be wondering is last offseason, instead of the Houston Rockets who played hardball with Fred and gave him 25, would we have given him 35? Would Fred have asked for 40? Loss aversion with this front office has been leveraged by agents against this front office the entire way through. The Pascal Siakam trade at the bottom. Look, man, I understand. Pascal Siakam's a franchise legend. He had a huge, huge game. In the finals, game 1 was one of the most efficient finals performances ever. Draymond Green is on record saying, I don't think anyone's ever outplayed me, but Pascal Siakam outplayed me. Pascal was a dream, for the Raptors. They had a vision, but it was very obvious from the bubble onward that vision was not reality. But they kept trying to force it. They kept trying to force it. No, this is our guy. We got to make it work with this guy. Why? The trade value just kept going down and down as you exhibited him in a suboptimal role, allowing him to effectively take on a role that was, I don't know, through the grapevine promised to him by the coaching staff and the organization. But when it was so obvious that he wasn't a number one, Why delay it? I made podcast after podcast saying he's not a number one option. We need to move off of this. He's not a leader. We need to move off of this. As people called me a hater. But the reality is he wasn't. And you kept featuring him as a number one option because you didn't want to burn bridges with him. But at the same time, like, what's going on here? I mean, there's so many examples throughout history. I mean, OG and Anobi, why are these guys so fairly valued now? They weren't fairly valued with us. Is it because we weren't putting people in positions to succeed? Maybe. Is it because we held on so long and waited till we were in a losing context and then traded them when their value was absolutely the lowest? I don't think RJ Barrett had any trade value when the Raptors traded for him. I really don't. I think he was a negative asset. I think I don't think anyone was willing to trade for him. So you basically traded the most valuable 3-and-D player in the league when he asked out for Emmanuel Quickley, who also had very limited trade value, was probably worth a first-round pick. The only reason OG's trade value was where it was because you waited. You waited a full year and a half after it was obvious that you were probably going to have to trade him and definitely going to have to trade Pascal. If you traded Pascal when you were supposed to trade Pascal, maybe OG would have stayed because he would have had the role that he would have wanted. And Pascal and OG would have been able to take over the offense and figure out, maybe at that point, OG could have figured out, maybe I'm not cut out for this. But instead, you allow Fred and you allow Pascal to basically push OG out the door. And let's just be honest, when OG changed his agent, it was done. So that was 2021, 2022 offseason. That right there, when OG Anunoby changed to Clutch Sports, it was done. It was done. When he fired his agent and he went to the Knicks-based kind of agent, you knew it was done. Like, he was going to push his way out. There wasn't enough money for him here. There wasn't a role for him here. Pascal was here. And then you inevitably end up trading both. And now everyone's saying, oh, if only we had OG. Well, if you traded Pascal earlier, there's a really good chance you keep OG. And there's a really good chance you have the money to actually pay him 36, 38 or whatever the hell he wanted. But instead you allow him to go to New York. And now that's the team that's probably going to become a problem for you for the next 3 years. So you create a division rival. Why? Because you wanted to do right by OG by trading him to the market that he wanted to go to. What about Pascal? Oh, he didn't want to go to Sacramento. He doesn't want to go to Atlanta. He only wants to go to Indiana. So we traded him to Indiana. What? Nico Harrison gets so much criticism for not dangling Luka Doncic to the whole league. Why don't we, as the Toronto Raptors, get criticism for not dangling Pascal Siakam beyond his range of desired outcomes? The Spurs are a fantastic organization. They have somehow managed to retain their reputation among league circles as a fantastic organization. Greg Popovich, R.C. Buford. They traded Kawhi Leonard to the furthest thing from his target destination of LA. Literally draw on a map from LA to Toronto. They put him in the worst position humanly possible for him. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want to go to Toronto. He doesn't like the cold. Kawhi hated the idea of Toronto. He was barely okay with the idea of New York or Boston, precisely because of the cold weather. So why can they do to their finals MVP what we can't do to a way lesser player? That's all we're thinking about. Now we come to the concept of overpaying our own free agents. This was a major subject of yesterday's post-game live. I don't like that Jakob Poeltl deal. I really don't. It's starting to bother my nerves just how poorly that's going to age. And I don't understand who we were bidding against for it, because I'm looking at centers like Steven Adams dominating at $12 million a year, and I don't understand why Jakob Poeltl is worth 27. I just don't get it. I understand that you get 2 breaks in that deal that make it a little bit more fair. Number one, he picks up his player option for next year, which he was inevitably going to decline, according to him. But the question is, given the market value of 31-year-olds, which is like around the age he would be when he opts out of that deal next year, this summer, who's paying Jakob Poeltl more than $20 million a year? Where's the market? Who is this team that's going to emerge from the woodwork and take him away from you? And if they are you not like willing to risk it? No, can't lose him for nothing. So we got to extend him now. And deal with the fact that he has back issues right away. Now, listen, a lot of people talk about Joel Embiid's contract extension. Joel Embiid was one of the 3 best players in the league when he was healthy. That's the kind of deal that a lot of people are going to look back on and say, well, the Sixers made this really huge mistake. Joel Embiid is owed like $50+ million. It's going to tank their entire team, et cetera, et cetera. Joel is around the same age as Jakob Poeltl. Centers, typically, I've often cautioned about paying guys over 30 that there's always a risk attached with health. You are now sitting in a situation where Jakob Poeltl has missed a quarter of the season already with back issues, and back issues are scary. When you're a big athlete, back issues are that is that's the Achilles heel, right? That is a big deal with older guys. And if Jakob Poeltl can be healthy over the course of that entire deal, we're talking 4 years, okay? We're talking this year, next year, the year after, year after. Your saving grace is that in the final year of that deal, when I think he's 34 or 35 years old, it's a partial guarantee. At which point, what's going to happen? The same thing happened with Bruce Brown. You love Bruce Brown. Picked up his player option for what? To get what? Brandon Ingram, right? Ingram is having a nightmare season. I want to be clear. Yesterday, I looked at the advanced box score, couldn't believe it. Brandon Ingram had a negative 16 box minus yesterday. Now, I'm perfectly for the decision to trade for Brandon Ingram. I didn't completely understand why they paid him what they paid him. And I didn't understand why they paid it quickly what they paid him either. It's just a really weird thing. When Kawhi Leonard left, it was pretty obvious that our championship window had closed, right? But we had the run it back problem from 2019 to 2022. We just wanted to be competitive because we're a championship organization. We didn't have the gall, we didn't have the nerves of steel that Sam Presti did, or Brad Stevens does, or shit, Danny Ainge does. These people are way less loss averse. I'll tell you that. They walk away from anything. Marcus Smart, franchise legend, gone. Love you, Marcus Smart, but man, Drew Holiday's a better player. Let's go. Make that swap. And Marcus Smart immediately falls off a cliff. Immediately. Kristaps Porzingis. Do you know how many good players were on the Washington Wizards like 3 years ago? Kristaps Porzingis, Denny Avdia, Daniel Gafford. That's a team that's in our conference. Why could we not have gotten any one of those players? It's hard, they weren't expensive. We were just willy-nilly whipping around first-round picks for everything. Why couldn't we make a move for those types of players? Our pro scouting sometimes can be quite bad. Trading away Norman Powell, who is always kind of on the outside for whatever reason with this front office. Like, I don't know, like they kind of dangled him a little bit. They dangled him in trade talks. They had this, like, he's in the rotation, he's not in the rotation. There's a few players, obviously, that have just never gotten like that inner circle trust love. Chris Boucher, Gary Trent Jr., Norman Powell, like they got their initial extension, but then after that, it was like anybody's guess, right? Kelly Olynyk, didn't care. They didn't give two shits about Kelly Olynyk. But then there are people that this like organization just falls in love with, like Emmanuel Quickly, Jakob Poeltl. They're just like, okay, this is our guy. Brandon Ingram, Scotty Barnes, right? And these people become irrationally valued. And then when it becomes apparent and obvious that you need to move off of them, there's never an analytical viewpoint on it. It's always emotional. So the run it back problem between 2019 and 2023, this need to like, okay, we're going to tank for 1 year and we're going to, bottom out and we're going to get Scotty Barnes and then we're going to immediately become competitive again and start making trades for Thaddeus Young and signing Kem Birch to extensive contracts and whatever. It's just really weird. Another point is overvaluing in-house development. So OG, Fred VanVleet, Siakam, Barnes, etc. Toronto very often like views internally developed players. They view them as more valuable than the external market does, right? Which leads to like refusing reasonable trades. This endowment bias, overestimating the value of the assets you own, caused Toronto to skip out on opportunities to reshape its core multiple times, right? It's led to fewer assets and less flexibility. The Raptors have never, under Masai Ujiri's entire tenure, had a surplus of draft picks. They finally had a surplus of draft picks after the Pascal Siakam trade. What did they do with those draft picks? Well, one went out for Ochai Agbaji, and one went out for Brandon Ingram. So now you have once again depleted your core assets. And so it is this sort of need to stay in the middle. We want to develop steady, stable, low flame out. There's no prospect in the Toronto Raptors, draft history that has failed miserably, right? There's also no prospect other than, after 2020 that has exceeded value exceptionally. It's just very middling sort of things, right? They don't want to take a risk on, let's call it, extreme personalities, people with character issues. They won't take on, Terrence Shannon Jr. They're not going to be the organization that's going to call Ryan Rollins. They're not going to take that risk. So I think sometimes their risk aversion is also a really major problem. But the overvaluing of in-house development and the in-house developed players, I think, has some sort of inherent bias in it because they value these players more. The fact that they've developed them means that there is a 20% premium on their value internally. So when you go to a trade table and you say Gary Trent Jr. is worth at least a first round pick, Bruce Brown's worth at least a first round pick. Not that Bruce Brown was developed internally, but the Raptors internally held Bruce Brown in very high regard. And so they go to the market and they say Bruce Brown's worth at least a first round pick. Chris Boucher's got to be worth something. And the market just says, no, because of the exorbitant value of these contracts, these guys are not worth anything. We don't have anything of value that we're willing to give you. So it's very rare that Toronto wins a trade, is what I'm saying. It's very rare. The Masai Ujiri threshold problem, like the Masai was always known for waiting for like the perfect trade as opposed to accepting one that was good enough. And waiting for perfect results often results in missing perfect windows. And this perfectionism, which is very much driven by loss aversion, means that deals collapse because they don't meet this idealized threshold of perfection. The Raptors repeatedly lose value by chasing maximum instead of dealing with optimal or sufficient. So you don't get the optimal value for OG Anunoby. So you say no, no, no. And this is widely reported around NBA circles that the Raptors were very hard to negotiate with, very hard to deal with. I'll tell you somebody who doesn't find the Raptors very hard to deal with. Player agents. They find the Raptors very easy to deal with because when it comes to giving out money, no problem. Emmanuel Quickley, what had Emmanuel Quickley proved up until that point to garner a $165 million deal? I mean, I was a big Emmanuel Quickley fan, and I remain a very big Emmanuel Quickley fan. I was a big, Brandon Ingram fan. I didn't think anyone in Toronto valued what Emmanuel Quickley did more than I did. And 32 million was shocking to me. And I don't think that anything since signing that contract over the last 2 years has removed that shock value. Jakob Poeltl, the asking price that they gave the Spurs was shocking to me. The contract extension subsequently, the very next offseason, was shocking to me. The next extension was double shocking to me because now he's even older and now you're giving him even more money. And where is the track? Where's the track record? Where's the playoff game? Do you know Jakob Poeltl has not played a single playoff game since being traded to the Raptors? For all of the value, and again, internally, you value Jakob Poeltl a lot, right? For whatever reason. There's been talks of, well, Jakob Poeltl is a top 10 center in the league. This is a direct quote from the Raptors front office. I don't think anybody else in the league agrees with that assessment of Jakob Poeltl. And unless you win a championship with Jakob Poeltl, and even still, I don't think that value is ever going to be held. So if you view him as a top 10 center in the league and the rest of the league views him as a top 22, top 25 center in the league, then how could you ever negotiate fairly with either him, his agent, or other teams? Because you clearly overvalue him. Is it a particular analytic that he shines in that you're like, well, everybody can't see it, but look. And I think that the championship has somewhat emboldened this front office to believe that they are right about the internal valuation. Obviously, Pascal Siakam. Pascal Siakam is a really good player. Last year, I would argue his stock went up big time as the Pacers went to the finals. You know when else his stock was up huge? When the Raptors won a championship. The very next year, his stock was really high. But the Raptors kind of waited, right? They wanted to hold on to him because he was their home developed guy. He was, their champion, whatever. And then they just allowed the stock to dip, 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 dip because they put him in a bad situation. And now they've watched the stock rise again with the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers probably would have been wise to trade him this offseason too. Maybe they have some loss aversion problems themselves. There's a commitment to ambiguity with the Raptors, and I think that this is clear. Toronto has an unwillingness to choose between contention and rebuilding. So they often rebuild while trying to remain competitive. And I think that it's important to develop winning habits, right? But I also think it's important to do so in the right way. It's important that it's important to acknowledge that Jakob Poeltl adds 4 to 5 wins every single year that he plays on this team, no matter what the context around him is. Now, when he is the 5-win addition on a 45-win team, I think that that's valuable and you should respect it. When he is the 5-win addition to a 25-win team, he is the difference between having a realistic shot at Cooper Flag and having no shot at Cooper Flag or zero chance at Cooper Flag. And that's where sometimes I think Toronto can't cut their losses. Now, it's worth noting that they are a pretty future-friendly franchise in terms of the fact that they see the game pretty well. They understand the trends. For instance, they traded for Jakob Poeltl. What happened after they traded for Jakob Poeltl? Suddenly, every single team had a center, and bigs were back. So you feel good that you have a center. But in the process of acquiring that center, you gave up the option of potentially getting 3 or 4 other centers that you could have drafted. You couldn't see what wasn't there, but you didn't want to lose the opportunity to bring back the guy that you originally drafted, who you probably had a lot of visions for, but you never really got to see full out. There was this emotional, teary-eyed almost soliloquy that Masai Ujiri delivered after trading for Jakob Poeltl, and he said, I went downstairs and there was Jakob, and he was eating cereal, and it was like he'd never left. And it's like, buddy, he did leave. He did leave. And the contract on the table from the San Antonio Spurs for Jakob Poeltl was $12 million. That was the most they were willing to give him. That's what I heard. But the Raptors, they wanted to give him 20. Why did they want to give him 20? Because they traded a first-round pick and 2 second-round picks for him. A very valuable first-round pick, mind you. And they gave up a chance to tank for him. So he already internally knew that he had him by the balls. And then when I heard, once again, Jakob Poeltl was around, $15 million is what he was willing to sign for. But the minute Fred VanVleet signed with Houston, all this money became available. His agent presumably came up to him and said, hey, here's a great idea. Let's up the offer from 15 to 20 because there's a whole bunch more money available now. And he got the 20. And now, in order to get him to agree to his player option, apparently, this 30-year-old center is able to hold you by the balls for an extension for another $100 million. What? It doesn't make sense. But this commitment to wanting to have a center on your roster because you might never find one again, and good centers don't grow on trees. Well, the question is, where was your proactive approach to going and trading a couple second-round picks for Daniel Gafford? Where's your proactive approach to drafting a Day'Ron Sharp and trading away a few second-round picks to get him? What about Derek Lively, the player that you inevitably could have drafted had you properly tanked the very year you acquired Jakob Poeltl? But Derek Lively is not a sure thing because Derek Lively is a rookie, and Derek Lively is not a sure thing because Derek Lively is not in your gym, and Derek Lively is not eating cereal. And so the loss aversion thing gets kind of loopy there. The Barnes era is a chance to break this cycle. The Raptors' recent decisive moves, trading OG, trading Siakam, granted, not at the right times, but actually resetting around Scotty, represents a break from a decade of loss aversion behavior. But for the first time, they've accepted the short-term pain of losing established players to pursue long-term upside. And I think that this is where, we kind of end on an upswing here. Last year, the Toronto Raptors sat perfectly healthy players. They tanked hard. Okay. They could only tank so much because their roster was so good. But they successfully did what almost no team ever does. They rebuilt the culture. They developed players. They played young players a lot. They won a lot of games, a lot more games than we would have liked. And they gave them a chance. They gave themselves a chance to draft in the top 5. Now, some teams egregiously tanked beyond them. Yes, but the Raptors walked into draft night with the exact same odds of landing a top 4 pick as the night that they went with Scotty Barnes. So effectively, given the fact that you did everything you did last year, developed the culture, developed, the young players, gave Scotty his reps, established, a floor, gave, um, kind of like reestablished your identity as a team. And a lot of that is actually helping you right now. Given the fact that you did all of that and still ended up with the seventh best odds of the number one pick is actually pretty freaking impressive. So I'd like to give the Raptors a bit of kudos on that. But now I warn you that very much following that season, they immediately went for a very NBA ready player in Colin Murray Boyles, which totally fine with that draft pick, but okay. There might have been somebody else that ends up being better than him. We'll see. They've obviously been very reluctant to move off of some of their core pieces, Jakob Poeltl, RJ Barrett, and subsequently now Brandon Ingram. They're probably going to be reluctant to move off these guys. And I think intelligence would show you that this team badly needs a backup center and they haven't gotten one. And intelligence would probably also tell you that long term, your best bet is probably a stretch big, and Jakob Poeltl ain't it. But because he establishes a floor of reasonable production, even though he is 30 years old, you've now locked yourselves into him being your starting center for the next 5 years. And it feels like it's unnecessary. Like, I understand that you think you're smarter than everybody and you see the value in Jakob, even though everyone else doesn't see the value. And I see the value in Jakob too. It's a really, really good player. He's a great player. At 14 to $15 million, he's a fantastic player. That's his fair value. Having him at 20, past the age of 30, is a scary, scary proposition. And right now, I'm very curious to see how the Raptors will navigate the next 2 months because they've obviously figured out that they're pretty good. They're pretty good right now. There's some pieces on this team that did not get extensions, which is Ochai Agbaji and RJ Barrett this offseason, which I was very surprised by. The RJ Barrett thing, I'm like, I wonder what he's asking for because if this front office won't sign the check, holy shit, he must be asking for double what they think he's worth. So internally, I'm conflicted because right now RJ's value is probably high because right now he's probably seen as like this, you know, this guy who buoys the offense a little bit, lifts it up. Look how terrible we've been without him. I think this is probably the most fantastic time to trade RJ Barrett, if I'm being honest, because he's probably going to come back and things might look better. But a lot of people have been saying, man, the offensive rating is so low. The offensive rating is down. The offensive rating is down. I don't know if you watched the NBA today, but it seems like a lot of teams are struggling to crack 100. December is a very, very weird hit the wall month for a lot of teams in the NBA, and it always has been, and it probably always will be. A lot of teams come out of the gate, and right now, there's a lot of players on your team that are probably worth a little bit more than they're actually worth. And I think this is probably a great time to explore a trade. But right now, I have a feeling that the loss aversion complex that has plagued this team for the last decade is going to come up again, which is they're not going to want to disrupt anything because how could you possibly ask an NBA champion to tank? That idea of Bobby Webster, like how can you ask an NBA champion to tank in regards to, Fred VanVleet and not wanting to tank for Victor Wembanyama? I almost feel like at this point, they're just like, how can you tear apart a team that is 15-7? And it's just like for something better, presumably for Trey Murphy, for Herb Jones, for Lauri Markkanen, like, yeah, you can. But the difference is Lauri Markkanen, he doesn't eat cereal in your basement like Jakob Poeltl does. You didn't draft him like you drafted Jacoby Walter and Grady Dick. You don't have that same association with him. The problem with the loss aversion thing is nobody else has that same association with your players that you do. Holding out Scotty Barnes from trades for Kevin Durant and, Giannis Antetokounmpo, I was thrilled. I was thrilled because I have an irrational attachment to keeping Scotty in Toronto. But most GMs wouldn't. So sometimes, maybe, the loss aversion thing can result in a good thing. Sometimes you stay at the roulette table and then the next hand or the next round is the one that gives you $1,000. And you might walk away thinking, I was right to be patient, except You weren't patient. You were scared. And I think the Raptors front office has predominantly operated from the stance of fear, fear of losing flexibility, fear of paying too much money, fear of not paying enough money, fear of losing free agents, fear of drafting busts. And I think that this willingness or need to toe the middle line is actually what's keeping them stuck in this perpetual loss cycle because the Raptors over the last 4 years have lost a lot. And some would argue they haven't lost enough. And I think that that's the point. Anyways, that's my rambling thought on loss aversion. If you would like to not let loss aversion plague your entire life, explore your life like an anthropologist. I think most people who've ever worked at hedge funds or worked with investments, investing, even if you're a stock trader, day trader, swing trader, I think you've had to at some point assess that sometimes you must cut your losses. And the problem is when a stock is down like $1 and you're holding 1,000 shares, selling it means you lock in $1,000 loss, right? But you also prevent another $1,000 loss. The point of the decision is you have a pre-scripted idea of when the loss, the acceptance of risk. So if I buy shares at 103, I buy 1,000 shares at 103, I have a stop loss pre-scripted at 102. That's the most I'm willing to lose. And the market maker can see that, and everybody else probably knows that that's my stop loss. But it's still kind of psychologically weird to presume that if I sell at 102, I lock in the $1,000 loss, and then I'll watch it go to 104 and wish I hadn't. And that's the emotional part of investing that can keep you very crippled. That's the emotional part that keeps you scrolling. That's the emotional part that keeps you in relationships you don't want to be in. That's the emotional part that keeps you at jobs you don't want to work at. That's the emotional part that keeps you living in a city that makes you depressed. That's the emotional part of basically why you don't make good decisions. I'll actually share one more thing with you because I am genuinely invested in this community having better lives. Try this, and this is something I found out yesterday, and it was kind of interesting thought, and I posted about it. Try this. Try take your right foot and do counter do clock do circles clockwise, okay? So clockwise circles with your right foot. I'm doing it right now. Try it with me. Do right foot circles, okay? Now as you're doing right foot clockwise circles, try writing the letter 6 with your right hand, okay? Just try that out. So you're doing the clockwise circles and try writing out the letter 6. What happens? What happens? If it's right and right, what happens? More likely than not, what happens is your hand starts to move in a circle as opposed to a 6, or your right foot starts kind of wonky trying to make a 6. Why is that? Presumably, if you try to spin your right foot in a clockwise circle and try to move your right hand in a counterclockwise circle, you will actually end up at some point just breaking your brain. AG 2K26 said, my brother walked in and thinks I'm insane now. Thanks. Tell him to try it. Tell him to try it too. I want to explain this. Why do you think you can't do it? Because your brain has a natural tendency to sync up the right side of your body. So when your right side of your body is doing this, moving forward, your right hand is moving forward, your brain prescripts that your right foot should also be moving forward. Hard to move your right foot back and your right hand forward and do that constantly. Same thing. Clockwise, counterclockwise, same side of the body. The point here is your brain goes towards efficiency at all times. Efficiency is what is familiar. A lot of people want to develop new habits like going to the gym, or they want to stop being so afraid to talk to that beautiful girl that's walking across, the room. But why, how do you stop being afraid to talk to that beautiful girl? How do you get out of your head? How do you stop yourself? Loss aversion. Loss aversion. You need to think about, if you're going to be averse to loss, then perhaps you need to imagine what loss really means to you. How about that? Right? For instance, reframe, right? Don't try to beat yourself up about like, oh, what kind of a loser am I? I couldn't talk to that hot mamacita. Don't do that. Don't do that shit. Because that just keeps you stuck. Okay. Think about it this way. There's a beautiful girl or a beautiful guy if you're a woman out there, or love is love, whatever. If you're a guy who likes guys, whatever. There's a beautiful person in front of you, and there is an opportunity to talk to them and say, hey, what's up? Do you do it? What if they're way out of your league? Do you still do it? What if you don't smell so good and you just came from the gym and you need a shower first? Do you still do it? What if they look like they're not interested? Do you then do it? I think this is the point. You need to reframe that situation, not from the perspective of what if I do it and it ends up being terrible, but rather, what if I don't do it and it could have been great? Right? What if I don't do this and it's amazing? What if I don't quit my job and don't find the job that makes me happy? What if I don't leave this relationship that makes me miserable and I don't find the person that I'm actually meant to be with? The devil you know is way better than the devil you don't, but actually, they're both devils. You see? And that's the point. You will change your entire life when you stop being afraid of taking risks and stop being so biased towards losing what you perceive yourself to have. 5 summers ago, 6 summers ago, I apologize, 6 summers ago, I went through a transformative summer where I threw away 90 garbage bags full of things that were just in my house. Now, I did not realize that my drawers were so full and that my apartment was so cramped. I didn't know that. But when I started telling people who had been to my house about this endeavor that I was on, they immediately went like, "Yeah, your place is really cluttered. Your place was really cluttered." And now I have a rule of one in, one out, which actually gets me out of the loss aversion thing. I can't get anything into my house until I am willing to toss something out. So literally, it can't cross the line of the door. If I buy a new lighter, the old lighter has to go in the trash. If I buy a new sofa, well, no, forget a sofa. If I buy a new set of forks, then the old set of forks have to go out right away. There is a set number of things. And in the process of throwing things out, dude, I threw out things that belonged to my late mother, my late father. I threw out, mementos. I threw out pictures. I threw out so many things. And you know what? I don't miss any of them because I love the space. The reason that I threw these things out is because I started to view space as a valuable commodity. I didn't have enough space. Most people don't view space as a commodity. It's the same thing with time. Think about this. You have a very distracting, very annoying, very toxic person in your life. This person eats up 3 hours a week of your life, but they're familiar to you. They're familiar to you, and you feel, whatever reason, obligated to them. 3 hours of your life. Time is the most precious commodity in the world. In the world. 3 hours, do the math. Sit down with your $100 pen and do the math. How long do you expect to live? Let's say you expect to live for another 50 years. How many weeks is that? Well, that's 50 times 52. Do the math on that. That's a lot of weeks. Now times that by 3. If this person lives for 50 years, and you live for 50 years, now do the equal sign. That's how many hours you're committing to wasting your life with this person. And there's nothing being added. People often, criticize people who are in finance or who are deeply analytical or maybe unemotional about this kind of stuff as being too cold. Oh, they're too cold. They're too calculated. No, they're rational. And when it comes to managing a basketball team, you have to be exceptionally rational, not emotional. Emotions are great when you understand them and you harness them and they are from a genuine place. But very many times, the core emotions, the base emotions that we're operating from are not good emotions. They're fear, they're jealousy, they're envy, they're loss aversion, things of that nature. And I think at that point, you have to catch yourself and say, am I doing anything to make my life better here? Or am I just slowly just trying to not make my life different? And different is not bad. A lot of people think different is bad. If you want to retrain your brain, you need new neural pathways. You don't need to derail old neural pathways. You need to make new neural pathways more accessible. And so, one great way to do that, and this is just a little bit of homework for you guys, is when you go to sleep tonight, before you go to sleep tonight, do one thing you've never done before you go to bed. And also, if you're a right handed person, brush your teeth with your left hand. If you are a left handed person, brush your teeth with your right hand. Do everything with your opposite hand. Eat with your left hand. If you're a right handed person, see how your day changes. Immediately, your day will change. And you can let me know in a couple of days if your life was a little bit better. I'll talk to y'all later. Have a great one. Thank you to the 141 people in here right now. I hope this was an interesting live, very different, very, just kind of something on my mind. And AG 2K26, a member. One of the perks of being a member is you get to send little member chats like this, and they get to be very prominent, and everybody reads what you have to say. Sometimes people can do this when we have 400 or 500 people in here on a post game live, which is also very cool. Said, I'd argue being sentimental is worse as a GM. Sentimental being worse than what? Worse. I agree. I think being sentimental and being fearful are generally considered weaknesses, right? KP7 said, so you think we can salvage decisions that our front office has made? It will be difficult because I don't think you have a lot of assets that are valued very highly. So you're almost like you're committed to them in a sense, right? That's kind of where you're at right now. Barbarian 667 said OKC can just easily just swap their picks for 30-30 plus first picks. Interesting. What is the difference between being sentimental and being emotional? I would argue they're very similar, but that's me. I think of that way. Anyways, worth noting right now, the Toronto Raptors will be playing the Boston Celtics tomorrow, and we will be covering that game on playback, which means there will be a watch along on playback.tv/players choice. You can definitely catch us on there. I'll put the Tariq said, did you hear Ox say Elton Brand say he's one of the greatest Clippers ever? Elton Brand is one of the greatest Clippers ever. He doesn't hold a candle at all to Blake Griffin, and especially holds zero weight in discussions with Kawhi Leonard and Chris Paul. Chris Paul is the greatest Clipper ever. Terrible game to cover, man. Quickly is questionable. Is he? Interesting. Well, if Quickly is questionable, then hopefully we will win. Now, I have a theory that I think Quickly is screwing everything up in the offense, even though he is very useful. And the numbers say Quickly has been good, but my eye test tells me that he is pretty much stalling the offense by himself. So I am curious to know if the Raptors will be better without Quickly. Just my thought. Anyways, I'll talk to y'all later. It is going to be at Scotiabank Arena, so we will be covering it on playback, and then afterwards we'll have you covered with a post-game live, and then we will do our members live tomorrow. So we'll see. Nice to get to see Hepburn. I hope we get to see Chucky Hepburn. That'd be cool. I would also like to see Scotty start at point. Personally, I would start Scotty at point guard. Anyways, I'll talk to y'all later. Have a great night. Peace.